you been to the Library of Congress? If not, Thursdays are the perfect time to visit. Join them after hours for Live at the Library, where cocktails in the iconic Thomas Jefferson Building meets live music, author talks, crafting, exhibits, and more. Every week is different, free, and inspired by the library's collections. Don't miss their summer movies on the lawn, screenings of pop classics from the National Film Registry, starting July 9th with Clueless. Plan your next night out. Visit loc.gov/live. Today on CityCast DC, we're talking about new taxes for DC residents. We're talking about the politics of our fountains. And we're going to talk about whether Rock Creek Tennis Center is going to be the next local park that gets a controversial Trump-era glow-up. Plus, in a members-only fourth segment, DC is finally about to have its debate about Waymo, and we're going to get into the contours. I'm here with my CityCast colleagues Ben Brash and Jackie Pizer. Today is Friday, July 10th. I'm Michael Schaefer. Here's what DC's talking about. Hey, Ben.
Hey there, Mike. How's it going?
Good. Hey, Jackie.
Hello. Happy to be back.
It is so awesome to have you guys here and to talk about work that both of you have done this week.
We love to see it. That's how I know I'm doing my job.
So, Ben, you did a couple pieces this week about tax proposals. We've just come through a budget cycle in D.C. Without getting too wonky about it. They had a big shortfall. The mayor proposed cutting a bunch of stuff. Members of the council obviously don't like to cut stuff. And so they restored it and mostly used sort of accounting tricks and touching the city's rainy day fund to deal with that. But there's a sense that like that can only be done once. And even the chairman of the council has said like, hey, we're likely going to do tax hikes next year. Meantime, two have actually been sort of introduced. What are they and like how far off is this?
So both of these are pretty far off. They have just been introduced. We're at the earliest stages, but what they both are, one is a business activity tax and another one is a wealth proceeds tax. So the business activity tax will tax large corporations that currently are not paying as much income tax. So think about like a law firm or a lobbying firm, law firm, being a pass-through corporation, things that we don't have to bore people with. The wealth proceeds tax, this is a tax on net proceeds that people make over a certain threshold. So it's kind of like the federal NIIT tax.
I'm confused already. You used a lot of complicated words there.
I know. Sorry, I got way too nerdy, way too quick. Apologies. Everyone, wake back up. We're going to go do fun stuff again.
Okay, but Ben, though, you are the person to talk about taxes because, like, I feel like you bring life to it. Read his articles. He somehow makes it interesting. And I can say this as someone who grew up with an accountant and heard about taxes all the time. So you're doing great.
Thank you.
So let me see if I get it right. The second tax, the wealth tax, is they're going to take people above a certain income and say, we're going to add a 3% tax on all of your like investment earnings, all your so-called passive income, like the stuff that you can do because you've got the capital.
That's exactly right. I could give you an example if that would make it tangible. So let's say there's a household that makes $480,000 in earned income and $40,000 in passive income from things like investments and capital gains, et cetera. So they would pay a 3% surtax on only that $20,000 above the threshold. So that'd be $600 that they're paying with this new tax.
So basically, everybody said during the mayoral campaign, hey, if we elect a Democratic socialist, it's going to be soak the rich the minute she gets into office. But she's not even in office yet. And there's these two measures that are designed to get more money to preserve the safety net and get that money by targeting people/companies with wealth and power.
That's exactly right. I will say that on this second tax, it's being put forward by Councilmember Nadeau, who is on her way out of council. She's stepping down. She didn't run for re-election and is a close ally of JLG.
All right. So the argument for these is, look, it's a tough environment. The city has lost a lot of revenue because of the federal cuts, jobs going away. We don't want to have to cut back on things that people rely on. So we need the money. What's the argument against it, and who's making it?
The argument against it is being made by tax hawks and people who say, hey, you know the real way to have more sustainable income? Make our district more friendly to businesses, because they are going to build brick and mortar and they're going to be around for 20, 25, 30, hopefully a lot more years. And just like when you're making your own budget at home, you like money you can count on, right? You like steady income, right? Like your salary. So having disparate, can't count on it income, it makes a lot of financial types really nervous. And so businesses are the most sustainable way of doing that. And that is why a lot of people say this makes us less friendly to businesses. You're going to now tax me. You're going to tax my law firm, or my lobbying outfit. Like, hey, thanks for nothing. Really appreciate that. And if I'm a high earner, which if I'm a successful business person, I might potentially be living in the district, then I don't really appreciate this new tax. Thank you very much.
I've been hearing this over and over again when I talk to people in the building industry. I mean, not only do they feel like the city already makes it really hard for them to build, but everyone is saying to me, these are people who study this. These are people who've been in this, in this world for decades, are saying the city needs to make incentives for us, for like companies to come here and build here. We need industry in DC. And clearly it's not federal government anymore. So I can only foresee a lot of pushback from that sector if this goes through.
Jackie, I agree with that. And I think that there's in one way, these proposals, particularly the business one, feel a little bit retro, as if we weren't in a situation for the last year and a half where the city's main industry, government, was under sustained, assault and or sort of changing in ways that may not change back. And the consensus is, well, we got to find a new industry that's going to employ people and generate revenue that city can use on schools and welfare spending and so on. The argument from the people who are in favor of this business activity tax, this corporate tax, is the way it's structured. It's mainly going to hit law firms, lobbies, these things that are differently. It's not like Safeway, those guys aren't going to leave. You're not going to move your lobbying firm to Kansas City for better taxes. They need to be on K Street. And so this idea that you're going to scare off business is farcical. What's the response to that?
Yeah, I mean, I think you make a good point about the law firms at first, because they are really buying up a lot of property downtown. I mean, they've only been expanding in the last year, buying these really impressive buildings with these beautiful, top floors with big windows to really impress their clients and show how successful they are. But I think you make a good point that this could target specific industries over the other. But when you look at it from afar, it's just more fodder for the business industry to say, well, we don't feel supported in DC.
The thing with the other tax, the so-called wealth tax, that seems a little clearer. If I'm a high earner and I get a bunch of money from my investments, and all of a sudden I'm going to have to give a chunk of that back. And I'm, particularly if I'm a high earner, I could move, I could buy a new house someplace else. That seems like a clearer disincentive. In fact, when it was first floated, the definition of wealth to be hit by the wealth tax was I think $250,000 for a married couple, which really that can hit a couple of federal employees, at a mid or senior level, and you're married and there's two of you, and then all of a sudden you're wealthy, and you sure don't feel wealthy in this incredibly expensive city. There was blowback, and they raised that threshold to a significantly bigger number. But look, DC has grown by 100,000 people in this century, and that growth, people who are for it, that growth generated a ton of money, which the city has used to really, really grow its budget and be able to spend more on schools, on social programs, on amenities. And making those people go away or incentivizing those people to want to live elsewhere is dangerous. Is there an argument back to that you've heard, Ben?
That's interesting. The money from the business activity tax, the idea of that is to use it on universal childcare. That's a proposal that's put through, which the argument is, okay, more childcare allows you to be freed up to go to work, to be a functioning member of society, to make more money, et cetera, et cetera. It decreases the stress on a lot of families if you can have universal childcare.
So it makes DC a more pleasant place to live.
Right. And it's just a better way to live.
What happens now with the city? They have just, the lawmakers have just passed a budget. Obviously, it has to go to the sitting mayor. And neither of these tax proposals are part of it. These are both things that would come later. I suspect that if they came before January, the current mayor would not look very kindly on them. She's said a lot of stuff against raising taxes. But what is the specific schedule from now on? And then Jackie, have you heard anything from folks you talked to about what, if anything, they're planning to do to stop this if they don't like it?
So the specific schedule is we'll break next week for the summer and we come back in September, and the council cannot have any meetings on any topic during that break. So we will come back and then it'll be kind of a race until we hit the holidays to try and give things the 2 hearings that they need and get them through markup, which can be an intense process that can, be months between these things. So it'll be a race to try and figure this out during this council session with this form of council with these specific members on there. So yeah, it's going to be a race to figure this out. And I asked the mayor's office for a comment. They said that they had none at this current moment. But indeed, Mayor Bowser has spoken out against these kinds of taxes, saying that we have more structural issues and this isn't going to work. I will note in the fall, there's an expected meeting where we all try and figure out how we are going to handle taxes and how we are going to make up this big gap in the budget. And you can believe I'll be very plugged into that.
Yeah, I haven't heard anything quite yet about, any very specific organizing efforts. I am meeting today actually with some folks who may know, so tune in. So hold off for that. We'll see. But I have heard a little bit of rumblings of some people from JLG's camp that are trying to start to rally and, get some people from the business industry side to meet and try and see if they can find a middle ground. That's just some inklings I've been hearing from some sources, but nothing concrete yet.
I mean, I will say, I wrote about this in the newsletter yesterday, but the McDuffie campaign and more broadly, the sort of people who want DC government to maintain its business-friendly posture, I think we're so lousy at articulating their point of view during the mayoral campaign that I wouldn't put a lot of money on their being able to head these things off that they don't like. Particularly with a new council coming in the sense that the progressives really have the wind at their back and were endorsed by the electorate and so on. I assume there are some conversations happening behind the scenes of how can we do better at getting our point of view out there. But whatever they were doing up to now, it's not really worked out for them, huh?
I mean, just to kind of flesh it out, the vibe is for those who say we need to protect the money is that we're the adults and you all on the other side are being ridiculous about, the number of housing units that you propose that you're going to put in. That takes a lot of money. And we've been extremely unsuccessful at doing that because of these poor relationships, or not as good relationships as they could be, with the business community. So you're not going to get that kind of housing that takes money and relationships, and you don't have either. So let's kind of be more realistic about it and less, altruistic about how we are going to run the city.
Oof, man, saying I'm a grown up and you're not seems in a democracy, it's not a great way to, I mean, maybe true, but it's not a great way to convince anybody, I don't think.
The compromise is supposed to be where good politics lies, but I guess we'll figure that out.
The French have a phrase, joie de vivre, the joy of living. At Alliance Francaise in Washington, D.C., that spirit is right here in your city. language classes, cultural events, a community that makes French feel like home. And this summer, kids can dive into French immersion camps with weekly themes and field trips. And when you become a member, you save on all of it. Classes, camps, and events all year long. So discover your joie de vivre at francedc.org. That's francedc.org.
Jack, you wrote this week about the Rock Creek Tennis Center, which for people who don't know, it's up 16th Street. It sort of juts into Rock Creek Park. It's where Carter Barron is also. It's part of the National Park Service. For years, it's sort of a little bit dowdy facility that has a tennis tournament every summer, but the rest of the time, it's just sort of normal neighborhood people playing. It's where, like, I taught my teenager how to drive in the parking lot, and there was like lots of other like parents doing the same thing there. I mean, so this is the sort of place it is, and that makes a lot of people think, well, that's just what the golf course at Haynes Point was like, and that is a reason why there's suddenly a lot of anxiety around this place.
Yeah, I mean, it's very important to the people who live around the tennis center, but it's also important to people who are passionate about tennis and travel there to play recreationally or travel there to go and watch a tournament. And when you're paying money to go to the tournament, for example, you expect really nice facilities. And this is a tournament that is lined up among many other of the big ones around the country. And so it's not a great look to go and see like crumbling concrete and bad locker rooms. So
what you wrote about this week was that there was in the city's budget, there's like $10 million that the city, which doesn't own the place, was going to spend on improving it. And this, I guess, is they want to keep this tennis tournament that brings in some revenue and adds some prestige. But this suddenly became an issue of great concern because they didn't know how the money was, because allegedly there was no clarity about how the money was going to get spent. What happened there?
Yeah, so the city last year approved $9 million to help rehab the facility, and then they recently added another $600,000 to that. But Janice Lewis George had some concerns about that. Now, she represents the area around the park, and this is her ward that she's looking out for. And one of the concerns was, how are we going to be able to regulate how this money is being spent, because it is owned by the National Park Service. This is not owned by the city. And usually there is a contractor that is in charge of managing that property. Last year, the National Park Service put out an RFP asking for pitches on who wants to run this facility. And they still haven't chosen that person. And yet all this money is about to be funneled in. So part of the amendment that she put out earlier this week was to make sure that every quarter the deputy mayor of economic development, along with the new leaseholder of the facility, will give updates on where the money is being spent and how that's going to impact or benefit the people in the community.
But so what's the nightmare scenario here? Because I mean, there's a lot of talk about this becoming another case of taking a sort of humble public facility and making it like glitzy and then unaffordable or unaccessible by regular people. And there's some specific fears attached to that people have cited.
Yeah. I mean, the nightmare scenario could be that there isn't anyone in place to run it by the time the money gets funneled in. The National Park Service has been pretty cagey about who they're going to give the contract to. There's a lot of discussion that the highest likelihood possibly that could go to Mark Ein, who's the chairman of the tournament that is played at the facility. And he has his own interests, right? Like, he has this very successful tennis tournament that he has an incentive to build out and make it more appealing for, high-end tournaments like this. Could locals be kind of left to the sideline? We don't know.
So there was reporting earlier this summer, I think in the Post, about worries within the Park Service that sort of in the gears of the bureaucracy there, people were saying, hey, we think they want to, turn it over to a business guy and then do some stuff that would like limit public access to the national park, which is against our mission. There was not necessarily evidence of that, but I took it to mean like the career regular employees of the Park Service. There was a lot of worry about that.
Well, we know how the National Park Service can be sometimes. Like, they don't like to give up what they have. in DC.
No,
But
they don't. But they're also at the forefront of the kind of politicization of DC's look in the Trump administration. So there's sort of
Absolutely.
I assume that there's a tension there between the Interior Department higher ups and the people in the gears of the bureaucracy.
yeah, I mean, a watchdog group that kind of focuses on national parks, or it's an interest group. They FOIA'd some of the correspondence between NPS about this, and internally they were like, "This is another example of the Trump administration bulldozing us and having business interests in mind." They're specifically referring to the possibility of Mark Ein taking over the facility. There's also concerns environmentally. They worry for the species that are in that area around the park. So some of it's valid concerns, but also a lot of it is kind of turned into politics.
I mean, from the other point of view, like let's say you want to glow up there. With a golf course, I get it, right? That like if you make a golf course that's super expensive to build and maintain, you're going to have to get the money to maintain it someplace, and that means you're going to have to add fees on these like public servants who spend their weekends at Haynes Point, and they're not going to be able to afford it. What's the like in this scenario where like a rapacious business guy gets his hands on the Rock Creek Tennis Center? Like, how does that? What's their version of the scenario where people get excluded?
I mean, right now, the money that is, definitely going to this facility is specifically for just the tournament, right? So Mendelsohn at the meeting the other day specifically pointed out two things, one being the locker rooms and the other being the bubble that is put over outdoor courts. Other things I've heard specifically is about the main 7,500 seat stadium, that the average person is not going to go. Now, listen, I don't play tennis. Like maybe
but
people do.
But I'm sure 7,500 people would watch you if you did.
Yes, definitely. Yeah. I haven't really seen much language so far of it for the average user. And it's very important to people in the community. So I can understand why folks, are a little wary about, well, is this money going to actually help all of us? Or is it just going to be for this tournament that happens once a year?
Jackie, what happens next? Is there a timeline on when this sort of who's going to run it gets decided?
I mean, the money will be funneled in. So ostensibly it would be by next year. I haven't seen a deadline yet as to when they have to find an operator, but I would guess based on the language that came from this amendment that they would need to have one in place because they're requiring updates every quarter from specifically whoever is the leaseholder and MPED. So.
All right, so I want to stay with the Park Service, I'm sorry to say. There was another story this week. Our colleague, Tristan Espinoza, noticed that the water in the Malcolm X Park fountains, the Meridian Hill Park fountains that were re-inaugurated earlier this summer to great fanfare after years of being dry, the fountains were running again. It was beautiful. People were coming and looking and marveling at the beauty. But then Tristan noticed, well, actually that water is really, really, really brown. And there's like bad stuff floating in it. And he went down there, he made some calls, and the Park Service said, well, actually, we're just flushing some pipes. And that is sediment from those pipes. It'll be clear in no time. Obviously, we're in a situation after the reflecting pool where they don't necessarily have the presumption of accuracy at the Park Service any longer. But it just struck me as the most insanely kind of this is DC in 2026 moment that like by their story, and it seemed like based on like even the pictures of the sediment, it seemed plausible to me. Something like totally normal, right? Like you flush some pipes and the water gets discolored, this happens, it goes away. It became for a moment this enormous political issue because the Trump administration has made such a big show of we're cleaning up the city that was hideous and repulsive, and now we're making it beautiful. People who don't like the Trump administration really want to say like, aha, and like, no, you didn't. You probably gave the contract to some crony and you screwed up and it was idiotic and this is a terrible, and you're no good. And so like a fountain repair, which really is not that exciting in the
we
real
have
world.
Trust issues.
It has, becomes a thing that everybody wants to project their vision on.
Yeah. Okay. First of all, I have to say that the discourse on CityCast Slack about the fountain is probably, I've only been in CityCast for a couple of weeks, and that was peak. It was so good. But I just said, the DCS, we have trust issues. The reflection pool is number one. like why wouldn't we have reason to think that something nefarious is going on here, that someone screwed up somewhere?
Well, no, and why wouldn't we have reason? Like, let's say someone screwed up, right? Let's say this was not a normal sediment from pipe flushing situation. A phrase I never thought I would say. There's been such a history of denying, we didn't mess up. We never mess up. Everything we do is perfect. Again, this is not like claiming that the Obamacare rollout was perfect. This is the most mundane part of government doing its job. It's, we've got some infrastructure and we got to maintain it. And sometimes it's complicated because of engineering and biology. But instead, it's we're in a moment where this can be a matter of high politics and falsehood.
I think that the focus on artifice and the presentation, this is the other side of the sword, is I now get to say, if you think this is the most important thing, then I get to have an opinion on something that really honestly does not matter, right? Like the color of the water and the flushing of the pipes, why does this matter? And the reason it matters is because you told me it matters. Right. And so now I get to care about it and I get to have an opinion on something I have no right having an opinion upon, instead of infrastructure and, the sexy tax stuff that we were talking about before. If you're telling me presentation is what matters and doesn't really matter what the food tastes like, then I get to play on those terms. And that's kind of what I think we're looking at.
The thing is, a couple news cycles ago with the reflecting pool, is now we're in the news cycle where it's about criminal justice. And before that, we were in the news cycle where it was about sealant flaking. But before that, remember when it was the algae news cycle? And at that point, everyone was suddenly a biologist, right? Everyone's an algae expert. And they're saying no, it had to be sabotage or it had to be this or clearly they screwed. I'm going to suspect that the number of people in the CityCast listener community who are actual credentialed algae experts is pretty small. And yet, here we are. This is a thing we're all talking about with some expertise.
Don't underestimate our listenership, Mike.
Yeah, first of all, that's so true. Secondly, I remember when everyone was a virologist, and I remember when everyone was a tariff expert, and I remember, people love to talk about stuff they don't know anything about. That's the joy of being human. But
that's why I love podcasting.
And the joy of being a reporter is then having to become an expert on that thing within a day.
Both of you are so right. That's exactly it.
All right. I want to give a big thank you to our newest CityCast DC neighbors, and it's a lot of them, so please bear with me. Thank you to Ann M., Jane L., Clara B., Ellen V., Kinney Z., Bella R., Kathleen O., Emily G., Mike S., not me, a different Mike S., Kathy S., Mary H., Alan L., Kathy T., John A., Stacy M., Donna F., Kate N., Ainsley Y., Vicky L., Alan Y., Paraj T., Barry K., Kaya H., Martha W., Liz G., Catherine R., Mark B., Susan B., Brian C., David R., Anna W., Pooh S., Alex P., Eric C., and David C. Thank you all for your support. Today, all of these people and every other paid subscriber gets a bonus 4th roundup chat. We're going to talk about the impending Waymo fight in DC. It's pretty wild. If you want to be sure you always get the full episode, please become a member. Head to membership.citycast.fm and sign up. It's only $10 a month. Members get ad-free listening, exclusive members events, and an extra events newsletter every week. Again, that's membership.citycast.fm. And that is all for today here on CityCast DC. Our production team this week was Jill Pelletieri, Julia Karen, Ash Durbin, Lizzie Goldsmith, and Matthew Rogers. You can check out all of our excellent newsletters and reporting at dc.citycast.fm. Our hosts are Bridget Todd and me, Michael Schaefer. Music is by Alex Roldan, with additional music from Blue Lou and Rue Walker from Triple Scoop Music via Getty Images. If you enjoyed the show, why not tell everyone about it when they're gawking at the Malcolm X Park fountains, whatever their color may be. We'll be back Monday morning with more news from around the city. Bye.